Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Chrome Horse. I'd just like to thank the Chrome Horse for offering up this hall for us today, so thank you, Chrome Horse. My name is Brett Nellis. I'm the chair of the Lynn County Democrats, and I want to welcome you all here. As you can see, this is part of the whole caucus process. Today, we're very fortunate to have with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York.
Thank you. Upstate in the house. Upstate's in the house.
So I'm just going to give you 1 minute's worth of information about Senator Gillibrand because you want to hear her, not me. So Senator Gillibrand was raised in New York. She was magna cum laude at Dartmouth College and then received her law degree from UCLA. She served as a law clerk on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals and a special counsel to the United States under Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Andrew Cuomo. And then she was elected into the U.S. House in 2006 and then started serving in the U.S. Senate in 2010. The one thing about Senator Gillibrand is she is a senator who, as you might want to look forward to, is the one who opposed Donald Trump the most in terms of voting. So a very good distinction there. And this is her first time to Eastern Iowa. So with that, I'm going to turn the stage over to Senator Gillibrand so that she can tell you all she has to offer. Thank you.
Watching Madonna on the stage, and she did not stand behind a podium. She did not do that. Anyway, it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for coming out today. I know a lot of you have the day off, so I appreciate you taking time off. I want to tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to tell you why I'm running and why I think I can win. Does that sound good? And then answer all your questions? Okay. So I grew up in upstate New York. Upstate New York is a rural area. It's got a lot of farms, a lot of dairy farms, a lot of manufacturing, small cities, small towns. And my first interest in politics came about when I was really little. I had a grandmother who loved politics. She was a woman who never went to college. She was a secretary. She worked every day of her life. And she recognized 75 years ago that all the legislators were men and all the support staff were women. And she wanted to have a say. She wanted to have a say in politics. And so she realized the best way to have a say was to ask the women of the legislature to participate with her in politics. And so she organized women for 50 years, getting involved in politics, teaching women how to go door to door, stuff envelopes, do phone banking, anything they could to elect a candidate that shared their values. And so my first memory of politics is going into a campaign headquarters with her when I was 10 years old on a hot August day, and a bunch of ladies are stuffing envelopes, and they're wearing cotton shift dresses, sleeveless cotton shift dresses, and I just remember being mesmerized by these ladies because as they're stuffing envelopes, their arms are jiggling, and I'm saying, oh my God, I want to be just like them someday. So sure enough, politics has been in my blood for a long time. And what my grandmother taught me is that grassroots activism matters, and what you do with your time matters, and that women's voices matter, and that you can do anything you set your mind to as long as you are willing to work hard enough for it. I had a trailblazer in my mother as well. My mother was one of 3 women in her law school class. In fact, she gave birth to my brother on the day she was supposed to be taking her criminal law final. They made her take it from the hospital bed the next day. But she also was a woman who dared to be different. By the time she was my age, she was a 2nd-degree black belt in karate. She was also a woman who loved to cook. She was a great baker. She made pies. She not only cooked the Thanksgiving turkey, but she shot the Thanksgiving turkey. And so I came from this very different set of women leaders, and it taught me, number 1, to be bold, number 2, to be brave, and number 2, to never give up. That if you do put your mind to something, you can get it done. I wound up going off to college. I went to Dartmouth. I went to law school, and I wanted to be a lawyer. I thought my mom was a great advocate, and I loved how she represented families when they needed help, adopting a baby, or buying a home, or starting a business. And I thought advocacy really would matter to me too. I find myself in New York City my first big job, working in a big law firm, and my aha moment in politics came about when Hillary Clinton went to China. I love the fact that our First Lady was standing on a stage in Beijing saying women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And the thing I remember most vividly from that moment was I was really annoyed that I wasn't invited to that conference in Beijing. And I was annoyed because I had been an Asian studies major at Dartmouth. I had learned Mandarin. I had actually studied from dorms in Beijing, and I thought I should have been invited. Well, I wasn't invited because I wasn't involved in politics. And so that's when I first decided as an adult that politics is important to me. And so I joined a women's group. It was called the Women's Leadership Forum. It was part of the DNC, and that's when I got involved. My first big event was a big event with Hillary speaking. 100 women were in the room, and she looked out into the room and she said, decisions are being made every day in Washington, and if you're not part of those decisions and you don't like what they decide, you have no one to blame but yourself. I'm in the back. I start to sweat, and I'm thinking, oh my God, she's talking to me. She's telling me I have to run for office, and I'm not ready. So she really spoke to me to say, get off the sidelines and start getting involved in politics. It took me a full 10 years before I had the courage to actually run for office. But during those 10 years, I worked on people's campaigns. I started getting involved. I learned how to organize people, organize women. And I decided that this is what I want my life to be about. I tried to leave my big law firm a couple of times and kept failing. First, I wanted to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I didn't get the job. I then tried to go to a big charity, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation. I didn't even get an interview. And then Hillary decides to run for Senate, and I thought, oh my God, this is my chance. I'm going to work on her campaign. I did not have any relevant experience. And so then my chance came. I went to a big event with a bunch of Democrats, and Andrew Cuomo was the speaker, and he was talking about why public service mattered and why being a Democrat mattered, and I was so annoyed. I walked up to him afterwards and I said, well, Mr. Secretary, politics is an insider's game. I don't know how to get from A to B. And he said, well, will you move to Washington? I had no interest in ever moving to Washington. I was a young single lady in New York City. I had a great boyfriend. I was not moving to Washington. And of course I said, yes, I will move to Washington. And so sure enough, he invites me down a couple days later. I interview and I get this job as special counsel. And I love this job. Every day I'm jumping out of bed because I'm so excited about serving and helping people with affordable housing and all these other issues. And I recognize that this is what I was built for. But then Bush v. Gore, we lost the election. There were no more appointed positions. And so I went back to New York, and lucky enough I got engaged, and I talked to my then fiance and said, honey, how do you feel about maybe someday running for office? And how do you feel about maybe moving home to upstate New York? Now, Jonathan had just finished his MBA and was doing venture capital. There's not a lot of venture capital in upstate New York. But he loved me, and he said yes, and so off we moved. And so when I was looking a few years later to actually run for Congress in that district, I recognized pretty early that was going to be a hard thing to do. In fact, I called a friend of mine who was a pollster, and I asked Jeffrey, how do you feel about this district? Do you think I can win? And he looks it up and says, no, you actually can't win that district. And I said, why? And he said, well, it's 2-to-1 Republican. I said, well, what happens if I, raise $2 million? Can I win then? And he said, nope, it's 2-to-1 Republican. There's just not enough Democrats to vote for you. I said, well, what happens if I run the perfect campaign? Clearly I could win then. He said, nope. He said, there are more cows than Democrats in your district. You actually can't win this district. And being competitive, I said, well, what happens if this guy gets indicted? Clearly I could win then, right? He said, well, it depends what he gets indicted for. So that was my first race, and literally no one thought I could win, except for my mother. My mother believed in me from the beginning. And so I ran the race, close to a perfect race. I did raise the $2 million, and my opponent never took me seriously, which gets to why I'm going to win. So he called me just another pretty face. They're trying to demean me as a young female candidate. I, of course, said thank you, and then said, what's your plan for getting out of Iraq? And I talked to him about the issues. And what that mattered was people in my district wanted to know what you were doing, who you were fighting for, and what you were going to do when you got there. And so I ran a tough race and I beat him, and miracles do happen. I beat him by 6 points. My next race, I was a young mom. I had just had a toddler when I won my first race. Theo was about 3. And in my first term in office, I had my second child, Henry. And so by the second election day, I'm walking around the district with an infant and a toddler. And my opponent decides to spend $7 million all on negative ads. And he ran negative ads, really negative ads. But what happened was, because I'm walking around the district with an infant and toddler, I learned a truism in politics. You cannot beat a woman with an infant and a toddler with negative ads because no one believes you. I beat him by 24 points. So I'm not afraid to take on tough challenges, and I have done it in very red places. I became the senator from New York, and I worked really hard on how I could bring people together and get things done. Now, my state was much more diverse than my district was, so I learned a lot and I learned it fast. But I learned how to bring people together, and I learned how to cross the aisle. And I was able in my first term to pass a lot of legislation. The 9/11 health bill, a bill for our first responders, men and women who raced up those towers when everyone was coming down, men and women who risked their lives to find survivors and then do the horrible work of finding remains. And today they're dying of awful cancers because of the toxins they breathed in. I walked the halls of Congress with those first responders, telling their story, lifting them up, explaining why these men and women answered the call of duty and deserved our help at their time of need. We passed that bill unanimously twice. I also worked on repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Our men and women who are serving in the military, they're willing to die for this country. Why should they be denied that right just because who they love? It was morally wrong. I had to go to my party, people saying, why? Why would you do this now? It's not convenient. Democrats would say that to me. And I looked them in the eye and said, when is civil rights convenient? It is never convenient. You do it because it's the right thing to do, not because it's the easy thing to do. I also passed a bill called the Stock Act, which is really pretty funny. So did you know that it was not illegal for members of Congress to engage in insider trading based on non-public information they get in the line of their job? Truly, that was not illegal. So I made sure it was illegal. And again, not all my colleagues thought that was a good idea, but you have to fight for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So I am a fighter. I have never backed down for a fight. I don't back down when you're right, because that's a measure of who you are. You have to be willing to take on the banks. You have to be willing to take on the moneyed interests, the corruption, and the unbelievable power that decides everything in Washington. If you, like me, believe that health care should be a right and not a privilege, then you have to take on the insurance companies. You have to be willing to have affordable health care for everyone, and that's why I support Medicare for all. If you believe we should have access to affordable medicines, then you have to take on the drug companies. The way Washington works is, when we passed Medicare Part D under George Bush, all the drug companies had to do was talk to their lobbyists who in the middle of the night can write in any provision they want. So they made sure that our seniors couldn't buy in bulk and get the lowest prices. So if you want cheaper drug prices, you have to be willing to take on the drug companies. You have to be willing to take on the NRA. If you can't stand the fact that there is more gun crime in this country and that young people are dying every day in cities, in communities, in schools, in theaters, you have to be willing to understand that it's not about the Second Amendment. We have the Second Amendment. We have hunters' rights. But what's really at stake is the NRA is largely funded by the gun manufacturers. Maybe some Russians too, but at least we know the gun manufacturers fund them. And so what they're really saying to you is, I want to sell that military assault rifle to a teenager in Walmart. I want to sell that gun to someone on the terror watch list. I want to sell that gun to someone who's so gravely mentally ill and has a violent background. I want to sell that gun to someone who has a criminal record, because that's why they're against universal background checks. It's because they want to sell weapons more than protect people. So you have to be willing to take on these challenges, because if you're not, nothing will change. Nothing will change. And as a mom of young kids, I see the world differently. I will fight for your children and your grandchildren as hard as I would fight for my own. It's how I see the world. And that's what we need more of. We need to be able to put ourselves in other people's shoes. We need to have compassion. We need to have empathy. You need to treat others the way you want to be treated. This country has always believed in the golden rule. We have always believed that we should care about the least among us. Until right now, until President Trump. Until President Trump has spewed so much hate, so much division, dividing us on every racial, religious, and socioeconomic line you can imagine. Spewing hate in every community. Hate crimes have gone up all across my state. I'm sure it's true here too. Anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-refugee. We have never been afraid of immigrants and refugees in this country. Our country was largely built by immigrants. Yes. And so why would we somehow decide that immigration and diversity isn't a strength? It is a strength. It's always been a strength. It's part of our American story. And refugees, we have the Statue of Liberty standing in New York Harbor. She stands there with a beacon of light and hope, asking to send us your tired, send us your poor, send us your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. That's what she stands for. So why does our president separate children and babies at our border? I visited those places. I was in an abandoned Walmart that has little boys the age of my sons, 10 to 17. They can't hug one another. They can't touch anyone. They wear the same clothes. They walk in lines. I ask, what's your favorite time in the day? Outside time, they get 2 hours a day. It sounds like a prison to me. It's not right. And so we have to stand up. We have to fight back. We have to restore the moral integrity of this country, the moral leadership of this country. This country has never been afraid to lead except for Donald Trump. He'll walk away from the global climate accords because he doesn't believe in global climate change. He doesn't care that we have severe weather all across this country and people are dying. He doesn't care that it's probably the greatest economic opportunity of our lifetime to take on green jobs and green energy and have a Green New Deal. He doesn't understand that this will be a measure of our greatest achievement. Just like John F. Kennedy putting a man on the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Why not have a new green economy? Not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Because it is a measure of who we are and our greatness. So I believe that I have the courage and the compassion and the fearless determination to take on President Trump, to take on what's wrong, and to do what's right. That's what we need as a U.S. president, and that's why I'm running for president of the United States. Woo! So I'm happy to answer all your questions. You can ask any question, but tell me your name and where you're from.